It's time for another edition of Weird Street Fighter Games, and today we'll be poking into everything that is the crazy Atari ST version. Another gem from the good people at US Gold. This game is ambitious as it attempts to run the arcade juggernaut that is Street Fighter II on the home computer, which launched in 1985, a full 6 years before the arcade game. This may look like Street Fighter II, it may sound like Street Fighter II, but just like any evil replicant, there's just something that isn't right about this version. Now, this version feels so different to play, requires different tactics, and has probably the strangest glitch in any version of Street Fighter II that I've played yet. Let's find out what makes the Atari ST game so weird as we deep dive in. This is the 12th edition of Weird Street Fighter Games here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. And I'll be honest, I never imagined when I first played the bizarre Brazil-exclusive Sega Master System version that every week or two I'd be playing another version of Street Fighter II in the quest to discover which is the strangest. The Atari ST version is one which I have been wanting to tackle for a while now, and one of the challenges with digging out all of these weird versions is that they're often difficult to get to run and play and especially capture footage from. After several attempts to figure out how to play Atari ST games in this day and age, I finally cracked it, and oh boy does this game not disappoint. Now, it is similar to the Amiga 500 version, which was also ported by US Gold, although this felt a little different to play. The Amiga 500 versus Atari ST debate is one that has been around since both systems launched, and just as much as a war between them as was between the Super Nintendo and Sega Mega Drive when I was young. I'll be honest, even though I think the Amiga version may be superior from a graphics and audio perspective, although there's not that much in it, I actually did have more fun playing the Atari ST version than I did with the Amiga 500 one. Now, I say this, but in fairness to the Amiga game, that was actually the second game in my journey of playing weird Street Fighter games, and this is my 12th, so I've undoubtedly improved at my Street Fighter skill set, as demonstrated by my last video, where I beat a janky plug-and-play version where you couldn't jump diagonally. So when I played the Amiga version after many years, it was something of a shock to the system as the controls were so different to what you'd have in the arcade and on most consoles. The Atari ST game is much like the Amiga version in that it kinda doesn't play like an actual version of Street Fighter II. You have various control options, and after having played the likes of the Amiga 500, Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum versions, where you could only use one action button often for all of your moves instead of 6 as they should be, I learned that alternative control schemes can be found in the likes of the Amiga and on this Atari ST version, which allow you to have separate punch and kick buttons. The Atari ST game doesn't play like the likes of the Game Boy game, where you just have a punch and a kick, where you press them longer or shorter to determine whether your punches are light, medium or heavy. Instead, like on the Amiga game, you'll be pressing your punch and kick action buttons in combination with the directions on the joystick to pull out different moves. This makes the game feel very unlike actual Street Fighter II from the arcade, but this Atari ST game takes things even further. Now, as I usually do, I often will play as Ryu or Ken as my first choice, but as on the Amiga game, it's not that easy to pull off any of your special moves with these characters. Determined to get through the game, I therefore relied on a combination of jumping and low kicks, heavy kicks, and primarily throws. Pulling off throws on the Atari ST feels different to any other version I've played, In this version, you'll see your character go to do a grab, but then not actually achieve it. Now, I don't recall if that's the case on other games, where you'll see the animation of the grab unless you're actually about to pull it off. Like, when you see the grab animation, it is guaranteed to be happening as best as I can remember. But in this, I was constantly seeing the grab animation as if I was attempting to grab, but just grabbing into thin air. It's almost made it a bit more like the grapple in a wrestling game, where you could attempt to grapple, but sometimes the opponent would be able to stop you before you complete the animation. In the case of Ken, you can either do a straight throw or a fancy rolling throw. In the case of E Honda, who I played as in the second run of this game, you can either do a throw or your squeezing bear hug move. Having struggled to pull off special moves as Ryu and Ken, I decided to do a second run as E Honda, as I figured his 100 hand slap and sumo headbutt may be easier to pull off with this control scheme. And I was half right. The 100 hand slap may be the most powerful move in this game, as I discovered, but I was unable to pull off the sumo headbutt at all. But to be fair, I found that I didn't really need to even attempt to pull off the sumo headbutt, as I found that I could pull off a kind of combo system which I don't think is intended, and is basically a combo system before it was even a thing in the Street Fighter games. The Atari ST version has messed up collision detection, and what moves can block what doesn't seem to correlate with what happens in a lot of other versions. As Ryu and Ken, I found that I could pull off consecutive rolling throws without my opponent having a chance to escape or recover, and as E Honda, I found that I could almost get into a jumping punch to connect with whatever my opponent was attempting to do, and as soon as I landed, I'd be immediately performing the 100 hand slap. Now, this is unlike on the other versions where you'd have to do a couple of regular punches, and as you tap tap tap, then you'd go into the 100 hand slap, but this would just register any punches I was doing in mid-air, so that as soon as I landed down to the ground, I would be doing the 100 hand slap, and there'd be no way for my opponent to escape. The opponents would also find it hard to jump over or dodge the 100 hand slap. I didn't try all of the characters, but what I did find was that as Ryu or Ken, if my opponent blocked moves, they would lose no energy, but once again the 100 hand slap would start to chip away at your opponent's energy even when they were blocking. This, along with their mostly inability to block or dodge the move, made me feel near invincible with it. I'd often find that I wouldn't jump or duck when I intended to, as the game would take my pressing of a direction in combination with pressing of punch or kick, and would do moves that I didn't intend. I also found the collision detection was way off the other versions, and moves would look like they hit and do no damage at all, but I'd also be able to block Bison's Psycho Crusher with kicks that shouldn't have been able to block it. I got the strangest glitch I've ever perhaps had whilst playing a Street Fighter game during my run against Dalsim. I was able to jump over his Yoga Fire and immediately catch him in a spinning throw. The spinning throw was faster than his fireball, and I wondered if I could actually set Dalsim on fire with his own fireball. Alas, I could not, and instead I actually still caught on fire and lost energy. But this is when the game glitched, because even though I was doing the throw, Dalsim then didn't lose any energy and got stuck in midair, and none of my attacks could do anything to him. I literally just had to wait for the timer to run out as I tried to attack him as he was just floating in midair, and then it came up that he won the round. Now, when he won the round, he suddenly clicked back into his usual animation, and then the game just continued as normal. But hold the phone a moment, because I have just discovered in the editing of this video that this same glitch did in fact happen on the Amiga version when I'd recorded it a few months ago. I don't know how I forgot this, but check this out, the same thing happening in the US Gold developed Amiga version. But now, let's talk about the game's presentation. Again, like the Amiga 500 version, I imagine this looked pretty exciting in still images in magazines, but in motion, It's really jerky. The scrolling is really poor in this game, but I was able to get used to it pretty quickly. Something about this version, which is also true of the Amiga game, is that the character graphics have this quality about them that looks like you're seeing a mirage of the game. You know, like when you're driving along a motorway and you see what looks like a wavy puddle of water in the distance, but then when you get near, it disappears. Yeah, that kind of waviness is the kind of quality that the animation in this game has for some reason. Now, the best example of this being when Ryu wins around and his winning pose just show his muscles kind of blowing back and forth in the wind. It's just unusual. His bandana thing would wave in the wind, but for some reason it looks like his muscles are doing the same. I will say though that however they did these graphics, there was something about them that just struck me as different in a positive way. Not sure why, but I felt like the faces and the animation of the characters had more expression than I was used to seeing on other versions. This may be a result of weird compression and that certain colours or pixels stood out more than they would in other versions that gave the illusion of teeth glimmering with a smile or eyes standing out more, but it felt like seeing expressions from the characters not present in the other versions of the game. They also skipped out loads of animation frames, most notably when you throw an opponent, the image of them being spun around is weirdly upright. There's not much in the way of music in this game either. The opening title music is nowhere near as good as on the Amiga version, where it slaps hard, as the younglings would say of today. One thing is that it has a bizarre tone on one note that jumps out like a guitarist broke a string midway through the recording. Other than this, there are one or two other tracks in the game, and you know, they just don't give you all of the iconic Street Fighter tunes. There are some sound effects saying Sonic Boom and punches and stuff, so it's better than some other versions in the sound department, but just lacks so much. I have been spoiled with running Amiga games on my A500 Mini in the last couple of years, so it was a bit jarring for me to have to emulate the Atari ST version, which comes on 4 discs, and you constantly have to tell the emulator to swap back and forth between them. Maybe someone out there knows how to make this all just happen in one loading session, but this was just a little bit old school for me to have to swap back between discs like you would on the Amiga or Atari ST or even on the PC with a floppy drive in the 80s and 90s. The game does have all 3 bonus stages, and whilst the flaming barrels got the better of me, I found that the wooden barrel level was perhaps the easiest one of any version that I've played. The car one though, that was a little bit different. It was like it broke apart in a lot smaller pieces and took a lot longer, and they even gave you longer to smash up the car. Although the Amiga 500 would continue to get its janky reduced version of Super Street Fighter 2, and the A1200 would get both that and a version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, unfortunately for ST users, this was the end of the road for the Street Fighter franchise on Atari. At some point I'll start diving into the many strange versions of Street Fighter 1, so we'll be back with that and the Atari ST in the not too distant future. Now, I don't think the Atari ST version of this game is that bad at all. It's certainly not awful, but it's certainly not great. It just has odd controls, weird collision detection combined with wavy graphics and jerky scrolling, and that really strange glitch. That just makes it feel like you're playing a completely different game disguised as Street Fighter 2. Now that's going to start to wrap things up for this video, but I want to take a moment to once again thank everyone for the continued support of the channel and this series looking at the weird Street Fighter games. The previous video in the series that looked at the officially released but hacked plug and play game was the first video on the channel to get 10,000 views, and for that I thank you. As always, it'd be awesome for you to click that like button and leave a comment, especially as this will tell YouTube to spread the videos further and further so that more people can discover them. Now, what were your thoughts on the Atari ST version of Street Fighter 2? Did you have this one back in the 90s, or does seeing this today make you want to check it out? With the Atari ST game, this is the 12th Street Fighter game I've looked at in this series, but we're still a long way from the end, and the next few videos are already in the works. And yeah, they too are weird. So if you haven't done so already, I would really appreciate if you would smash the subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel, and do go to www.xstreamed.tv/gaming for all of the article versions of any of the videos you see on the channel. And so with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Sonic boom, and we're off the air.